Okay, so our trim carpenter is complete. At least he says he's complete. So what we want to do now is we want to go through and check everything he's done. Make sure that we've done it in quality fashion, that it's clean, complete, and quality fashion. So the first thing we want to do, the windows. He's put the extension jambs in and he's put the casing on the windows. So we want to check, make sure everything's nice and tight, that it's plumb level and square, and that he hasn't over nailed the trim. You know, some of these guys can get a little crazy with these nail guns where they just pepper them with holes just because it's fun. We don't want that. Our painter will have a heart attack if we have that. So we want to make sure there's not too much nailing, but everything is secure. We also want to make sure the miter joints are tight and everything is level. So we'll go through, we'll check that. We also want to check the base molding that they've installed. Base molding, we want to make sure there are no butt joints. I'll show you what those are. We want to make sure all the miters are tight in the corners. We also want to make sure that the base is installed at the proper height above the floor. This will help us when we put the flooring in. I'll go through that as well. Then we're going to check the door. Make sure the door has been shimmed properly and that it's installed so that it operates properly and that it's plumb level and square. So let's go ahead and let's take a look and see how our trim carpenter did. Before we start our trim carpentry quality check, I want to mention that we had all of our trim sprayed by our painter when he was here painting the ceiling and priming the walls. This saved us a trip and a day in the schedule. Okay, so on the windows, these are egress windows because this is a basement, which means that in the case of a fire, we want to be able to take this window out. It actually slides out of the window opening. So what we've done, we want to make sure that the extension jambs, which are these wood jambs on here, that they're not butted up all the way to the window, because if they're tight, it's going to be real difficult to get that window out of there. So what we've done, our trim carpenter has done here, is he's left a gap about 1.25 inches all the way around between the actual window frame for the escape window and the jamb. In this case, we'll be able to get them out and we'll be able to escape if there is a problem. So the other thing we want to look at on our windows is the casing miters. As you can see here, they're nice and tight. There's really no excuse for big gaps on those, especially because the windows were nice and square, so we don't want to have to fill it with caulk. So a good tight miter is the way to go, and in this case our trim carpenter did a great job. Okay, one of the other things we've done here, because we've created this urban loft feel, what we've done is we've drywalled the walls and we've got the open ceiling that's got the urban painted look to it. More of a modern look. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to cover up, take a piece of trim and cover up that rough edge at the top of the wall. So we've got base molding, we've got 3-inch base molding, colonial base. We've turned it upside down so that the detailed edge is down, and we put that all the way around the room at the top of the wall and painted it the same color as the ceiling. That'll cover up the rough edges of the drywall, and it'll kind of blend in the wall with the ceiling. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so here's a better look at that base molding that we've turned upside down and applied at the top of the wall. It makes a nice transition from the wall to the ceiling and covers up that rough edge of drywall at the top of the wall. Okay, so let's check the base molding. Make sure we've got the proper height above the basement floor here. Like I said, if we were on a subfloor, we'd have the same situation, just in this case we've got concrete. So what we want, in this case we've got carpet, so we've got a 3/8 of an inch gap all the way around. We've checked it all the way around the room. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to tuck the carpet underneath there. The other thing is if we've got hardwood or ceramic, we want to make sure that the base isn't set tight to the floor because we're going to lose the look of the base. So if we've got a 3-inch base and we've got 3/4 inch flooring down thickness, then we're going to lose 3/4 of an inch of the base molding reveal if it's tight to the floor, if we're installing it before flooring. So the other thing you can do is install the stuff after the flooring. Just from a carpet perspective, you always want to put the base down ahead of time. Okay, so for your interior door, for a quality check, we just want to make sure that it operates properly, obviously. We want to make sure that it doesn't bind in any way, either at the door stop, which is this middle piece here, or at either of the jambs. In this case, it doesn't. We also want to make sure that the door is actually tight at all the door stop pieces. So this middle piece that runs at the center of the jamb, want to make sure that the door slab itself is tight to that all the way around. And in this case, it is. The other thing we want to do is just make sure that all the casing on the door is straight, plumb, or straight and square, and that the miter joints are tight. And lastly, what we want to do is we want to check the height of the slab. Make sure that the door itself isn't going to rub the flooring once that's installed. And in this case, we're going to have carpet, a plush carpet, so we're going to want to make sure that door is up at least 1 inch off of the floor, and in this case it is.
Here's just a closer look at the quality of the workmanship of the trim carpentry. You can also get an idea here. We used an airless sprayer to apply the paint, and it really makes a really nice finish in the end versus trying to brush it on or roll it on. It looks a lot smoother. It's a little bit harder to touch up, but it's a much more custom look. You also want to check the unfinished side of this door here. Make sure they shimmed it at the bottom, middle, and top of each side. Basically that secures the door properly. They either put screws or nails through it, and we know it's not going to go anywhere in the future.
Okay, so one of the other things I told you I would talk about would be the butt joints and why we don't want them. Basically in the trim, I've got a couple pieces of trim here. A butt joint just means that we're going to take a piece of trim and we're going to cut it 90 degrees, just cut it straight through, and we're going to place those two pieces of trim together. This is any time we have, over a 16-foot length, or let's say the trim comes in 8-foot pieces and we've got a 10-foot length of wall, we're always going to have to butt it together, or we're going to have to piece it together. In this case, if you butt it, if you cut them at 90 degrees and then you place them together, the wood's going to dry out, always does, and it's going to shrink. And when it shrinks, the two pieces are going to pull apart and you're going to have a gap in between them. Now, by doing a mitered cut on those, by taking each piece and cutting a 45 on them so they fit together nicely, when those two pieces of trim do shrink, you're not going to get that obvious gap between them, so it's not going to look like somebody did something wrong or didn't want to do the job to begin with. So in this case, our trim carpenter went through, he's done a bevel on each base molding trim, so everything looks good, and we're not going to have a problem when the furnace kicks on in the winter.
Here we can see our trim carpenter has cased out our access panel for our sewer clean out. We want to check all of the clean outs in the basement now and make sure that they've been trimmed so that we can get to those in the future. I like to secure these access panels with a couple of screws instead of nailing them or gluing them in place. This way it's easier to take them off when we need to. One other thing to mention here, when the painter came in to spray the trim pieces before they were installed, he also sprayed the stringer on the stairs, which is much easier than doing it by hand. You can see here that our trim carpenter has all the base molding installed on the stairs, and at the transitions he's got plinth blocks installed to go from the high areas to the low areas, which makes it much easier and much more professional looking to go from one height to the next on the base area. A little bit tough to see here, but where the angled base molding comes up the stairs and meets the landing, there's a plinth block to transition down to the horizontal piece at the landing. Okay guys, that does it for our quality check for the trim carpentry activity in our finished basement. Stay tuned for next time when we review the final electrical.